Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to honor a man whose name has become synonymous with resilience, dignity, and unshakable conviction, Nelson Mandela. His story is not just one of political leadership, but of extraordinary endurance in the face of inhumanity. Nelson Mandela was arrested in 1962 and eventually sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in fighting apartheid, a brutal system of racial segregation and oppression in South Africa. Of his 27 years behind bars, he spent 18 of them on Robben Island, a remote, windswept piece of land off the coast of Cape Town. The conditions there were incredibly severe, designed not just to imprison the body, but to break the spirit. Mandela's cell was a small, cramped space measuring barely 7 feet by 9 feet. It had no bed, only a straw mat on a cold concrete floor. There was no plumbing, no heating, and minimal ventilation. The prisoners were subjected to hard labor in a limestone quarry under the blazing sun, with very little protective gear. The dust from the quarry permanently damaged Mandela's eyesight, making it painful for him to be exposed to bright lights for the rest of his life. Meals were sparse and nutrition was poor, often differing based on race, with black prisoners receiving the worst food. The regime was also psychologically cruel. Prisoners were allowed only one visitor every 6 months and could send or receive just 2 letters a year, each carefully censored. Books were restricted, and access to newspapers was limited or denied entirely. Communication between prisoners was often forbidden, and punishments for defiance were harsh. Despite this, Mandela and others found creative ways to speak, using coded messages, whispered conversations, and passing notes hidden in laundry or under plates. Every aspect of life on Robben Island was designed to strip away dignity and hope. But instead of crumbling under these circumstances, Mandela endured, adapting his mind and body to survive an environment built to destroy both. His years on Robben Island became a symbol of both the cruelty of the apartheid regime and the incredible strength of a man who refused to surrender his principles. Nelson Mandela's time in prison was marked by immense physical suffering, but he refused to let those conditions define or diminish him. While his body was confined, his mind remained active and unchained. Mandela understood early on that survival in prison wasn't just about enduring the physical conditions. It was about mastering the mental and emotional challenges that came with isolation, monotony, and degradation. One of the most powerful tools he used to stay strong was education. Mandela believed that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world, and he lived by that even behind bars. He read constantly: history, philosophy, literature, politics. Whatever books he could get his hands on, he absorbed them with purpose. He especially found strength in the works of Shakespeare, Greek classics, and revolutionary texts from thinkers like Karl Marx and Mahatma Gandhi. These readings didn't just serve as a distraction. They became his source of strength, helping him refine his vision for a free South Africa and deepen his understanding of justice, leadership, and humanity. But Mandela didn't stop at personal growth. He became a mentor and father figure to many younger political prisoners. Robben Island, under his influence, evolved into what some inmates called Mandela University. He organized political discussions, taught fellow prisoners about law and resistance, and encouraged them to study and better themselves. His ability to guide others, even while imprisoned, showed the depth of his leadership. Mandela's commitment to self-improvement and the empowerment of others became a quiet but powerful form of resistance. He transformed prison from a place of punishment into a space of reflection, learning, and moral development. Instead of letting the prison break him, Mandela used it to sharpen his intellect, discipline his emotions, and shape himself into the leader that South Africa would eventually need. One of the most remarkable aspects of Nelson Mandela's prison years was his unshakable commitment to preserving his dignity, even when every part of the prison system was designed to rob him of it. From the moment he entered Robben Island, Mandela refused to be broken, mentally, morally, or spiritually. The apartheid regime had hoped that by locking him away in a remote, brutal prison, they would silence his voice and reduce him to insignificance. But Mandela would not allow himself to be humiliated into submission. Despite being stripped of basic human comforts and treated as a number rather than a man, Mandela carried himself with the calm composure of a leader. He insisted on being treated with respect, not just for himself, but for all political prisoners. When guards called him by his prison number, 466/64, he would respond only when addressed by name. He demanded fair treatment and would engage prison officials with intellect and discipline, never losing his temper, even when provoked. Isolation was one of the harshest tools used against Mandela. He spent years with extremely limited contact with the outside world. No news, minimal visits, and censored communication. The regime aimed to erase him from public memory. But even in solitary moments, Mandela cultivated inner strength. He developed strict daily routines, including early morning exercises, meditation, and study sessions, to keep his mind sharp and his morale steady. Among fellow prisoners, Mandela naturally emerged as a figure of authority and guidance. He listened, advised, and often mediated conflicts. In group decisions, others looked to him, even older inmates. His sense of fairness and wisdom set him apart. Even prison wardens, many of whom started out viewing him as a dangerous terrorist, gradually came to respect him, not because he demanded it with force, but because of the quiet power of his character. Mandela's leadership wasn't loud or aggressive. It was grounded in patience, discipline, humility, and the unwavering belief that he was fighting for something greater than himself. Even though his voice couldn't reach the world beyond the prison walls, his actions spoke volumes inside them. His conduct reminded everyone around him, both prisoners and jailers, that oppression may control the body, but it cannot conquer the soul. While many would consider prison a place of stagnation or defeat, Nelson Mandela saw it as a place for deep reflection and strategic planning. Instead of succumbing to despair, he used the long, silent years to examine his beliefs, rethink his methods, and strengthen his political philosophy. Prison gave Mandela something he had never had before: time. Time to think without interruption, to study history in depth, to observe the world from a distance, and to reshape his approach to liberation. Before his imprisonment, Mandela had been a fiery activist who believed that militant resistance was necessary in the face of brutal oppression. But in prison, he began to understand the need for long-term strategy over short-term reaction. He realized that if South Africa was to be truly free, it couldn't simply replace one oppressive regime with another fueled by revenge and anger. Instead, the future had to be built on unity, dialogue, and reconciliation. He spent countless hours contemplating what kind of leadership would be necessary to transition South Africa from apartheid to democracy. He read political theory and biographies of great leaders, learning from their successes and mistakes. He reflected on the social divisions within South Africa, between white and black, rich and poor, urban and rural, and considered how a new nation could heal centuries of inequality and hatred. Mandela also prepared himself for the challenges that would come after his release. He knew that freedom would not be achieved by chance, and that the struggle wouldn't end with his liberation. So he began carefully crafting what a post-apartheid South Africa should look like, one where black South Africans would regain their rights and dignity without stripping others of theirs. It was in the quiet, confined corners of his cell that he laid the foundation for what would later become a peaceful transition to democracy. His time in prison turned him into not just a symbol of resistance, but a statesman in waiting. He emerged not just as a political figure, but as a visionary leader, ready not only to demand justice, but to build a nation that could sustain it. Prison didn't silence Mandela. It helped him refine his purpose, elevate his understanding of leadership, and prepare for the day he would guide South Africa into a new era. Even behind towering prison walls and under the constant watch of armed guards, Nelson Mandela refused to let the anti-apartheid movement die. One of his most courageous acts was maintaining a lifeline of communication with the outside world and with fellow activists, despite the immense risks involved. The apartheid regime believed that by isolating Mandela, they could silence the liberation struggle. But Mandela knew that a revolution could not be paused. It had to be nurtured, even in silence and secrecy. On Robben Island, political prisoners were kept under intense surveillance. Letters were heavily censored, conversations monitored, and meetings strictly controlled. Yet, Mandela and his comrades found ingenious ways to bypass these restrictions. They passed secret notes hidden in soap bars, food containers, and even inside the seams of clothing. They whispered messages through the grates of prison cells and developed a coded language to communicate without raising suspicion. These messages often contained news, strategies, morale boosts, and encouragement for those continuing the fight outside. Mandela also used his rare and brief interactions with visitors, lawyers, family members, or trusted friends to pass on critical information. While visitors were often separated by glass and closely watched, Mandela became skilled at conveying meaning through subtle gestures, word choices, and facial expressions. Each visit, each message, was a small but vital pulse keeping the movement alive. But communication wasn't limited to the outside world. Inside the prison, Mandela fostered a sense of unity and purpose among his fellow inmates. He organized study groups, political discussions, and underground leadership meetings. By doing so, he ensured that the imprisoned leaders remained mentally active and ideologically aligned, ready to return to the movement stronger and more informed. Perhaps most impressively, Mandela never allowed communication to become a tool of revenge or hatred. Every message he sent, whether to fellow ANC members or even to his adversaries, was rooted in clarity, discipline, and a long-term vision of peace and equality. He carefully managed these communications to avoid unnecessary violence and to guide the movement toward a future built on justice rather than vengeance. Through secret letters, hidden messages, and coded exchanges, Mandela turned a prison into a nerve center of resistance, proving that even in chains, a determined leader could keep the flame of freedom burning. Nelson Mandela's ability to endure nearly 3 decades of imprisonment wasn't just the result of physical endurance. It was grounded in a deep, internal foundation of discipline, moral strength, and an unshakable belief in justice. Every day in prison tested him. The conditions were harsh, the isolation was crushing, and the psychological warfare of the apartheid regime was relentless. Yet Mandela never allowed bitterness or hopelessness to take root in his heart. One of his most powerful survival tools was self-discipline. Mandela believed that if he could not control the external world, he could at least control himself, his thoughts, his routines, and his reactions. He structured his days with precision, waking up early, exercising in his tiny cell, reading when he could, and maintaining a consistent routine that kept his mind and body sharp. Even when the prison authorities tried to break his spirit through sudden punishments or restrictions, he responded with calm, measured resistance. His self-control became a silent form of rebellion. Along with discipline, Mandela drew upon a deep reservoir of inner strength, a strength rooted in his identity, his purpose, and his responsibility to his people. He never allowed the prison walls to define who he was. He reminded himself constantly that he was not just a prisoner. He was a freedom fighter, a symbol of resistance, and a voice for the voiceless. This mindset gave him power over his situation. While others might have crumbled under the weight of such a long sentence, Mandela endured because he never lost sight of why he was there. But perhaps the greatest source of his endurance was his belief in justice. Mandela's faith in the righteousness of his cause gave him the moral clarity to withstand years of injustice without falling into hatred. He truly believed that his suffering had meaning, that it was part of a larger struggle for the dignity and rights of millions of South Africans. This belief gave him hope, even in the darkest moments. It helped him rise above personal pain and connect to something far bigger than himself. The dream of a democratic South Africa where all people, regardless of race, could live as equals. His survival wasn't just about making it through each day. It was about preserving his values, vision, and humanity. Through immense discipline, emotional resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice, Mandela didn't just survive prison. he transformed it into a crucible that forged an even greater leader. When Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison on February 11, 1990, he had spent nearly 3 decades behind bars. Many expected him to emerge angry, vengeful, or broken. After all, he had been subjected to humiliation, separation from his family, physical hardship, and the slow passage of time in confinement. But Mandela surprised the world. Instead of revenge, he chose forgiveness. Instead of fueling the fire of division, he offered the hand of reconciliation, even to those who had caused him deep pain. This decision was neither easy nor impulsive. It was the product of long contemplation during his years in prison. Mandela had come to realize that true freedom wasn't just about the absence of physical chains. It was also about releasing the hatred, bitterness, and rage that could destroy a soul and a nation. He often said, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." This mindset became the cornerstone of his leadership in post-apartheid South Africa. Once released, Mandela immediately began to guide the country through its most fragile and volatile period. South Africa was deeply fractured, its people scarred by generations of institutionalized racism, poverty, and violence. Civil war seemed like a very real possibility. But Mandela's calm presence, his moral authority, and his extraordinary ability to forgive helped prevent the nation from falling apart. He began by negotiating with the very leaders who had once ordered his imprisonment, understanding that peace could only come through dialogue and mutual understanding, not through retaliation. He became a bridge between the oppressed and the oppressors, advocating for a rainbow nation in which all races could coexist in equality and respect. His leadership inspired a peaceful transition to democracy, culminating in the historic 1994 election, where Mandela became South Africa's first black president. But even in power, he did not seek dominance. He focused on healing. He supported the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which allowed victims and perpetrators to share their stories, face the past, and pursue national healing rather than punishment. Mandela's choice to forgive was not a sign of weakness. It was a display of incredible strength, wisdom, and vision. It sent a message to the world that justice does not always require vengeance, and that the future can be built on hope rather than hatred. His leadership in this critical moment shaped South Africa's destiny and turned him into not just a national hero, but a global icon of peace, resilience, and moral courage.